Welcome everyone to the Wednesday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers held a walkthrough today, gearing up for their game this Saturday against the Carolina Panthers. We'll wrap a bow on last weekend's game against the Lions, plus we'll also look ahead to this upcoming weekend's game against the Panthers. We'll also take a look at running back Aaron Jones' contract situation in just a moment. Before we get into any of that, as always, you know the drill. You can be a part of our conversation. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question down in the chat. Pete and I want to hear from you. We'll get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. Wide receiver Tavon Austin made his debut in head coach Matt LaFleur's offense this past weekend against the Lions. He had a couple of passes off a jet sweep motion for 8 yards, and he also returned a punt. How much more can Packers fans expect to see Austin used in this offense?
I would think more. He didn't play many snaps at all, and they were all pretty early last week. I think they generally like to integrate guys into things slowly, who haven't been with the team. So he's had a couple weeks of practice now, right? So this will be, I think, his third week of practice. So I would think they could ramp it up a little more. And the playing time's there to be had. They love LaFleur really likes that jet sweep motion. Even when he doesn't hand the ball off, he likes running it just to keep that defense spread horizontally. So I would guess we'll see him a fair amount more. If I had to bet, I'd bet we'll see him a fair amount more than we did last week. What was it? Do you remember? Did you see the snap count? I think it was only like 5 snaps. It was something pretty low.
I think it was just around there. So, yes,
yeah.
Expect to see more of Tavon Austin in the coming weeks for the Packers. A player that we saw a lot of on defense was inside linebacker Chris Barnes, who was often used as the nickel linebacker in place of safety Raven Green, who is injured. He is on injured reserve. Barnes was also used in the dime defense as the sole linebacker on the field in the second half of the game. Ultimately, Barnes played about 58-59% of the snaps. What do the Packers like about undrafted free agent Chris Barnes over, say, a Kamal Martin or Christian Kirksey?
Well, I think if you compare him with Kirksey, he's probably just faster and quicker at this point. Kirksey's 28. He's had several injuries. In the world of playing linebacker in the NFL, 28's not particularly young. You're starting to lose some of your just pure speed at that point. I think Barnes is just a little more athletic at age 22 or whatever he is right now. His edge over Martin, I think, is just experience because he's been healthier. Martin missed 1.5 weeks of camp, which might not sound like a lot, but that's half a camp. Camp was only 3 weeks long, if you remember. So, he missed a lot. He would have gotten a lot of work then. Plus, I have to go back and look, but I think he missed the first 6 or 7 games. So he missed a pretty good chunk of time. So that's got to be what they like about Barnes over Martin there is he's just he's had so many practice and so many more practice and game reps than Martin has. I still think Martin's the best talent of those three pretty clearly to me, but kind of take that for whatever it's worth. I don't make a living scouting and coaching players.
Barnes and the rest of the Packers defense may be catching a break this weekend against the Carolina Panthers. Running back Christian McCaffrey is not expected to play this upcoming weekend as he's been dealing with a number of injuries this season. Right now, he's dealing with a thigh injury. He's missed about 10 games this season. This could be big for the Packers defense. However, the guy that's backing up McCaffrey isn't exactly a slouch. Running back Mike Davis is averaging about 42 yards per game this season. How much do the Packers need to prepare to stop the run this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, it's just he's a decent back, but it's just a lot different animal because he just doesn't present the catching. McCaffrey is such a good receiver and running back, and he's the dual threat. He's as good as there is in the league as far as the dual threat goes. So it's just a different animal preparing for him, and their offense there's just less to prepare for. It's a big difference. But Davis is just, as far as running back goes, Davis is a decent back, and as we've talked about for I don't know how many weeks here now, whenever we talk. But if I'm playing the Packers, I'm gonna run the ball and keep running it and stick with it. A lot more than, for instance, Detroit did. I would keep running it and Packers, their run defense is guilty till proven innocent,
Speaking of running backs, let's hit on some news about running back Aaron Jones. Unfortunately, Packers fans, probably not the news that you want to hear. Jones becomes a free agent in 2021. He announced yesterday that he has made an agent change. He is now being represented by Drew Rosenhaus of Rosenhaus Sports. What does this change mean for the status of his current contract negotiations as he seeks a contract extension with the Packers next season?
Yeah, there's, probably a couple different interpretations you could make on this. I mean, I don't know if you're probably too young for this, but there was, years ago, I don't know, it was 15 years ago, or maybe probably more than that even, where Rosenhaus was on the cover of SI, the most hated man in football, and he cultivated that rep as being this really hard, tough negotiator. But you talk to, like Andrew Brandt, for instance, who was the Packers negotiator for a long time, he always said, and you'll see this in quotes from other guys too, that he considered Rosenhaus a deal maker, like he's the guy who wants to get deals done. So he found him pretty easy to work with for the most part. Jones obviously was unhappy about something. You've got to think, you got to think maybe his previous agent wanted him to accept a deal that Jones didn't think he should accept. And so he thought it was time to move on. That's the best guess. There could have been other things that worked there. You never know, but that's the best guess. Does this increase the chances of, let's say the Packers tag Jones? Does he not sign the tag? Does he wait until the start of the season before he signs it? So he misses all the offseason and camp. There's repercussions to that as far as how guys generally play when they do that, and whether they get hurt. It can hurt both the team and the player. So there's a lot of things to consider there. Rosenhaus doesn't seem to have any qualms about having guys hold out. He thinks that's usually in their best interest. That wouldn't technically be a holdout because he wouldn't have signed the contract, but in reality, it's the same thing. Jones would probably draw a harder line there than he might have with Steinberg, who was the previous agent. So, you could analyze it to death. And in the end, I don't know if this increases or decreases the chances that they do an extension, or what this would mean for sure if they ended up tagging him. It does tell you they were talking, right? It sounds like they were doing quite a bit of talking. The Packers want to re-sign this guy, but it's a running back, and there are the perils of signing those guys to a lot of guaranteed money with injuries and how quickly they can decline. Teams have to be careful there. So it just makes this really interesting thing to watch now for the next couple months, and perhaps beyond that, depending on what happens in February and early March.
Pete wrote a great column over on PackersNews.com about the importance of the Packers re-signing Aaron Jones this upcoming season. If you haven't checked it out, go take a look at it. We'll continue to update you all as we get updates about the status of Aaron Jones as he continues to negotiate a contract with the Packers. Let's go over to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube for some of your questions now. We'll start with Levi to continue a conversation about, I suppose, the salary cap, potential cap casualties next season. Levi asks, he points out that defensive lineman Dean Lowry seems to be earning his contract now. Lowry has had a couple of sacks over the last couple of games. Will he be back next year, or will he be a casualty of the salary cap? Taking a look at Lowry's contract, he has 2 more years after this season left on his contract. His cap hit in 2021 is $6.3 million. How important is it that the Packers continue to have Lowry around next season, or would he fall victim to the lowered salary cap of 2021?
Yeah, I could easily see him being a victim. He's played better the last couple of weeks. I thought he really leveled off for most of the season. Like he didn't seem like he was any better than he was last year. And, he was, I can't remember what his salary is next year, but cutting him would save at least a couple $1 million on the cap, if I remember right. And with the cap going down rather than up, every $100,000 matters quite a bit. So I could see the Packers still thinking that they really needed the cap room for other things, such as Aaron Jones, such as trying to find a bargain signing at another position in free agency. I could see him parting ways with Lowry, but he definitely has helped his case the last 2 games. And, there's a reason they don't make those decisions now, because there's still games to play, 3 more to go, plus could be several in the postseason. And so on all these offseason moves, it's all fluid, and their inclinations could change depending on how guys play and how their health is between now and maybe even early February if they're still playing in early February.
A lot of time left for the Packers to make these decisions and for Packers players to prove their case, as the salary cap is expected to be a minimum of $175 million next season, which is quite the drop off from what was anticipated to be before COVID hit. Thank you, Levi, so much for your question. We appreciate you joining us as always. Let's go over to Rick on Facebook. Rick says that the Packers should use wide receiver Tavon Austin in the slot. As we've discussed several times on this show, Austin has been primarily used in Tyler Ervin's role as the pre-snap motion wingback. How likely is it that Austin would be used as a slot receiver in this Packers offense?
I'm thinking not very. He was drafted to be a slot receiver. He was like I want to say the 8th pick of his draft. I mean, this guy ran, his official time was in the 4.3s. He says he ran in the 4.2s. This is a super dynamic player, and yet he just couldn't quite make it in this league as a slot receiver. He's small. He's like 5. I don't even know if he's 5'9", but he's in that range, and he just couldn't make it as a slot receiver in this league despite being that dynamic. I think the role the Packers have for him as more of a hybrid. I mean, it's kind of a cross between a running back and a receiver, and it's all short passes, and it's, the jet sweeps and all that. That's kind of where his niche in this league probably should have been from the start, as it turns out. So I don't see him using him as a slot receiver unless, a bunch of injuries hit. I think they feel like they have better options there, even if they don't have a small, quick guy to fill that role like a lot of teams do.
Thanks so much, Rick, for your question. Let's go over to Steve on Facebook. Steve asks, is this the game that running back A.J. Dillon gets a few snaps? Dillon was active for his first game this past weekend against the Lions after coming off of COVID-19 reserve for five weeks. He didn't do very much on offense. I think maybe he had a few special team snaps. However, how likely is it now that he's getting acclimated back up to game speed that the Packers would use him a little bit more this upcoming Saturday against the Panthers?
Well, they can't use him any less, right? So maybe a little more, but I'm done predicting they're going to play this guy. I'm assuming that he's just not going to play unless they have injuries there, that he's just going to be at most a couple snap a game guy until something changes, because they've done nothing up to this point to show that. He's missed a lot of time now, a lot of practice reps, at least a few game reps. So unless they just change their thinking because of the cold weather and that this guy will be tough to tackle in December, coaches are generally, my experience has been, they're pretty conservative about these things. They err toward the guy who knows what he's doing, who's a little less talented, over the guy who's a little more talented, but they don't have as much faith in because he hasn't done it as much. He hasn't played as much. And that seems to surely be the case here. So I'm guessing he plays maybe a little bit, but really not very much. But who knows? We'll see.
Thank you, Steve, for your question. Let's go over to Michael on Facebook. Michael wants to know, who will show up and make a splash play on defense to change the game this upcoming weekend? We've seen a number of defensive players break out this season, have more productive seasons. Players like defensive lineman Kingsley Keke has had several sacks over the last few games. Safety Darnell Savage Jr. has had a sack and interception. He's putting up some numbers in the stats column. Who is most poised to have a good game this upcoming Saturday?
Could be any of those guys. Maybe Preston Smith kind of turns things on at the end of the year. You can't rule it out because he did play really good football last year. Maybe Jair Alexander, maybe they'll throw at him a little more. Or, the Pettin, I saw Andy Herman suggested today that they should maybe try Alexander in the slot. I could see that, get him more in the middle of the field. He's showing he could blitz. I mean, he had that blitz for the safety against the Vikings, and while that was a mistake, you remember after the game he said he thought it was a run play, and the smart thing he did was once he committed to going in and he saw it was a pass, to do anything else, he would have just got caught in no man's land. So he just barreled ahead and got the sack, but point being, he's a dynamic guy. So you play him in the slot, he could blitz a little more too than he can from playing outside cornerback. He's really tough in the run game, so I could see you lose something on the outside then, but I could see trying him in the slot more or playing either Amos or Savage, either in the dime spot or just down in the box more often. So there's, any of these guys could jump up and make a play, but they got to keep trying things because, the defense is that's still obviously the weak spot. And if they need to be better on that side of the ball. They need to make more plays. I was talking with Eric Ronchek when we were talking Monday doing our film review, and he put it pretty well. He said, they basically they need that defense to get one more stop than they get stopped on offense. And especially if it happens in the first half, then they can get up and play from ahead, which was exactly what happened, for instance, last week. So they just got to make enough plays to get off the field. So any little improvement could be a difference in winning a game or making it a lot easier than it otherwise would be.
Thank you, Michael, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's go over to Jerron, our friend Jerron over on Facebook. Good to see you. Jerron wants to know, what will the temperature be in Green Bay on Saturday night? It is a high of 35 on Saturday, I believe a low. The low is 26 degrees with morning snow showers in Green Bay. How eager are the Packers to have a nice cold weather game with the Panthers coming from out east to play in Lambeau Field?
Yeah, I think they would love it. Panthers are, kind of southeast a little bit, so they're not used to the cold, and Packers have been living in it now. We've been in the 20s or really low 30s for basically more than a week now, so I think that's close to enough time to get acclimated to it. And I think they try to go outside for most days for the team stuff. So I would think the Packers would welcome a nice brisk cold night and a little snow. They'd probably feel okay about that too.
Thanks so much, Jerron, for your question and for joining us tonight. Over on YouTube, John wants to know, what do you think is the Packers' weakest defensive area? The defensive line, the linebackers, or the defensive backs versus this week's team? How does this Packers defense match up against the Panthers offense?
The weakest spot. Traditionally it's been inside linebacker. I guess you'd probably still say that, but the D line isn't that strong either. Clark isn't playing up to his contract, and they don't have a lot to go with him if you're just talking about the interior linemen, if you're calling the Smiths outside linebackers. So I would probably go. It's still probably the inside linebackers, but they do have more talent there than they've had in the past, and it sure seems to me like they have more talent than how they're producing as far as points go and defensive passer rating. I would have thought this defense would be better than it's been. So you can kind of take your pick though on what you think the weakest area is. I'd probably go D-line.
All right. Thank you so much, John, for your question. We appreciate you joining us. Levi over on Facebook wants to know, what is Robert Tunyon's contract situation? What is it currently? Is he a restricted free agent next offseason, and how much will they have to pay him? Tunyon is a restricted free agent this upcoming offseason. How is that process going to work for the Packers as they look to keep him in-house?
So they'll have to put a tender on him. He was undrafted, so putting on the cheapest tender is out of the question, because whatever tender you put on is if they sign with another team, that team would give up whatever round the guy was picked in. Since he wasn't picked, they'd get nothing as compensation, so they'd have to match the deal. They're either going to put a second-round tender on him or a first. I can't remember exactly what those are worth. I would think second-round tender is going to be, I think at least, I would guess $3 million at least. I'd have to look, but so I would think he's going to be in for a contract in that vicinity, and then he'll be a really good candidate for an extension, maybe during the season next year.
Something to keep an eye on heading into 2021. Thank you, Levi, for your question, and thank all of you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. I will be back tomorrow with Ryan Wood to continue to look ahead to this upcoming weekend's game against the Carolina Panthers. For Pete Dougherty, I am Olivia Reiner. We'll see you next time.